Today's episode is called Love God and Love Your Neighbors. We're going to take a look at Matthew chapter 22, starting at verse 34. Hey, it's Amber, wife, mother, type A child of God. Here are little things we look at everyday issues from a biblical perspective with one simple goal: to know and love God more. Thanks for listening. And just to give you a little bit of context before we get started, this is Holy Week, meaning that Jesus had come into Jerusalem on the day that we call Palm Sunday at the beginning of the week. And on Thursday is Maundy Thursday, what we refer to as Maundy Thursday, when he washed his disciples' feet. And then he was arrested. He went through the trial. Good Friday, he went to the cross. Sunday, he rose from the dead. So we're in those days in the middle of the week when we see, as we read through scripture, that the Pharisees and the Sadducees, the two ruling groups in the Jewish society at that time, are just coming and pummeling Jesus with, questions that they're trying to trap him. They're doing their absolute best to catch him in his words, and they want to bring down his ministry. And this just shows us that, honestly, even as Jesus was doing the right thing, and at the end of his ministry, he was coming in strong. He was doing what needed to be done, and he was resolutely going to the cross. And the devil was just after him, like, bring him down by any means necessary. Let's try this, and if this doesn't work, then let's try this. And it just should be a good reminder to us that trouble and hardship are going to be a way of life, that we love to think that things should be easy because we're following Christ, and there's just nothing about that that's in the Bible. The very first verse in the section that we're looking at today says, hearing that Jesus had silenced the Sadducees, the Pharisees got together. And I think so many of us feel like that so often. You get through one really trying time in your life, whatever it is. Sometimes it is persecution, because you stood up and you did something right. But sometimes it's sickness, a diagnosis, or there's financial trouble, or, there's just relationship problems, or even just issues with making decisions and trying to figure out which way to go. It can be really troubling and can be trying a lot of times. I just want to remind you that Jesus said, look, in this world, you're going to have trouble. It's just part of life in this world. And which should remind us, it's not all from Satan. We also live in a sinful world where things just don't go well a lot of times. It's just part of life. And we also have a sinful nature. And that means that we a lot of times have to bear the consequences of our sin. So when we lie, we may have strain in our relationship. When someone finds out that we lied about something, they're going to come back to us and things might not be great for a while. If you're super rigid, I was today, it's a Sunday morning, and I struggle with that today. I wanted to be out the door at a certain time to get to church, and that didn't happen. And then, I wasn't happy with my husband's driving on the way to church, and we got to church, and my kids did a couple of things that just right off the bat annoyed me. And I'm 5 minutes into the church service, and I'm stewing about all these things before I realize, Amber, stop. You're in church. Concentrate. This is a time to worship. Confess. Confess your sins. Your rigidity is going to bring you down today if you don't knock it off. And so our own sinful natures can cause us enough trouble on its own. And then we have the world that we live in, and then we have Satan and his army that are constantly trying to come against us too. Jesus did not have to worry about his own sinful nature because he didn't have a sinful nature. He was perfect in every way. So he only had to deal with the threats from the enemy, the army of evil, or from having to live in the sinful world for a time. But I just want to remind you, before we go any further, all throughout the Bible, we see that people who walked with God had to struggle because they were part of this world. So the Apostle Paul wrote in 1 Corinthians 1, starting at verse 8 and following, he said, "We do not want you to be uninformed about the troubles we experienced in Asia. We were under great pressure, far beyond our ability to endure, so we despaired of life itself." Just think of that. The Apostle Paul is trying to do all this stuff in God's kingdom, and you'd think if anybody should have it, smooth sailing, if God should smooth all the paths and make it good for him, it should be the Apostle Paul, because he's trying to do God's work. Yeah, he was still living in a sinful world, and he still had the devil and all those who walk with the devil against him. So it was not smooth sailing. And then think also of the parable of the sower. Jesus told that parable, and you talked about how a sower went out to sow seed, and some seed fell on a path, and it was immediately eaten by the birds, and some was thrown on the rocky soil, and it immediately grew up, but then it withered. And there was some that went on amongst the weeds, and that too grew up, but then it was strangled out when it grew up with the weeds. And this is the thing, in Jesus' explanation, he said that the seed that went on the rocky ground refers to the person who hears the word and receives it with joy. But they last only a short time, because when trouble and persecution come, they fall away. And the seed that was thrown among the thorns and the weeds, that is the people who hear the word, but the worries of this life, the deceitfulness of wealth, it chokes it out, making that seed unfruitful. And I right now am in a season in my life, the age that I am seeing so much of this. In America, we don't have a ton of persecution like other countries do. In other countries, people have to gather in caves, and they have to leave their houses. Their houses are destroyed. They watch family members get shot or cut up with machetes. Their family members are kidnapped because they follow God. But here, we don't have that so much. What we do have is the seed sown among the thorns, where so many people my age are so invested in the world. And what are we going to get out of the world, and building their own kingdom, that they honestly just don't have any time to walk with God. They don't have time for church. Church isn't thrilling enough. It's not, flashy enough or emotional enough, or it doesn't pull them in enough. And after all, they know who God is, so they're good. And I can't even say that without thinking of what James said. You know God, great. Even the demons know God and shudder, but they're going to hell. It's so easy to get pulled into all the desires and the things of this world, and wanting to build our kingdom and make the money and get a name for ourselves and do more, instead of really working in God's kingdom and for his glory, and to help other people to know him. And yet, eternally speaking, everything that we do to make a name for ourselves or to build wealth here, that's all going to be gone. It's not going to last into eternity. When we take our last breath, nobody cares. Nobody cares. Only what we do in God's kingdom. Only what we do trying to get other people to know God and to follow God, so that they are with us in heaven. That's the only thing that matters. Eternally, there will be consequences to everything. And so, when we think about how hard it can be at times, we are battling these ideas, and we are battling against our desires to really get more and have more and do more of the stuff that doesn't last. And yet, as we read on, we're going to see why that is not the way to go. So, one of them, an expert of the law, tested Jesus with this question. He said, "Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law?" Now, the People's Bible points out that this actually is a pretty interesting question, because if you think about it, there is no greatest command in the law. They all are the same. If God made the commandments, they all matter. Jesus didn't give us lists of these are the biggies. Make sure you keep these, Do not kill, do not steal, do not commit adultery. Make sure you keep those. Here's the most of the time, if you get around to it, list of, don't lie, don't gossip. Those, Jesus, God didn't give us those. He didn't say these laws matter, these laws don't. No, if he made the commands and if he made the laws, they all matter. We don't get to say some of these make sense and some of these don't. So we're just going to go with the ones that make sense to us, and the other ones, I don't know, God just must wanted us to pick and choose. No, not true. Now, right now you might be saying, well, hold on a second, Amber. Aren't there a whole bunch of laws in the Old Testament that we don't keep anymore? Yes, there are. So sometimes we separate the law into civil, ceremonial, and moral law. The civil laws are the laws that pertain to the nation of Israel in the Old Testament. So those dealt with things like inheritance or idolatry. This you can do, this you can't do, that type of thing. The ceremonial laws were the laws that governed the religious life, ceremonies that they had, different celebrations, purification. So that had to do with their religious life. And then the moral law were those laws like the 10 Commandments that we still uphold even to this day. So the civil laws clearly are not really laws that we follow anymore. We are not, in the 12 tribes of Israel, so we don't get to inherit land from our forefathers. And so those things don't pertain to us anymore. The ceremonial laws, we a lot of times don't do the same religious things that they were doing in the Old Testament and even in Jesus' day until he came, because those ceremonial laws were meant to foreshadow the coming of Jesus. So they were meant to point ahead to a time when Jesus would fulfill everything for us in our place. So Jesus was the perfect lamb who gave his life as a sacrifice to pay for all of our sins. So we no longer have to bring doves or lambs to sacrifice. Jesus paid it all. So the civil law and a lot of the ceremonial laws, they're not things that we follow today. Is there still value in learning them, reading about them, knowing about them? Yes, there is, because again, what is the heart behind them? What is God trying to teach his people about how to love and obey God, or how to love and honor your neighbor? So the Old Testament is not null and void. Now that Jesus came, there is still great wealth in reading the Old Testament and understanding these laws and what they were pointing to, because they show us the heart of God and they show us what he was going to do, the great length he was going to go through to make us holy and clean, which was a very big ritual back in the Old Testament. So there's still a point to those. But Jesus, thank God, he fulfilled all those. And so we don't have to keep those laws today. But there's still value in knowing about them. Anyway, getting back to our lesson in the New Testament, when the teacher of the law came and asked this question, thinking that he was really going to trap Jesus. But Jesus didn't flinch, just like right before this, when the Sadducees came and when another group of leaders came before and asked Jesus other questions pertaining to other issues, Jesus didn't flinch with those either. His answer was, love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest command. And the second is like it, love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments. So Jesus was saying, look, if you love God with all your heart, soul, mind, those are the commandments that deal with things like, you shall have no other gods, and remembering the Sabbath and keeping God's name holy. That is loving God with all your heart. And if you also love your neighbor, you're going to keep the rest of the commandments, like honoring your father and mother, and don't steal, don't kill, don't give false testimony or lie or slander about your neighbor, don't covet, don't commit adultery. Those things you're going to be loving your neighbor. And so basically, if you love God well and you love your neighbor well, then you'll be fulfilling all the commandments. And so by doing this, he really stumped the leader who came to him, because he's saying that, guys, this is so obvious, because everything can be summed up with these two things. Ilvisikar said, he wrote the book, The Gospels, and he put the Gospels all together, and then he added commentary to them. He said this: true love towards God, according to the first table of the law, which is the first three commandments: love, have no other gods, don't misuse God's name, and remember the Sabbath day. So he said, true love towards God, according to the first table, must man itself in love towards your neighbor in accordance with the second table of the law, which is all the rest of the commandments. And true neighbor love flows from the true love of God as from its source. In other words, Ilvisikar is saying, look, God's love, loving God, is the well that we draw our love from in order to love our neighbors well. Now, you go, well, I have an atheist neighbor, and he is a really good neighbor. He's a good friend. He's kind. What would you say about that? Well, even Jesus said, so you love those who love you. Even the pagans do that. So that's not that uncommon. People of the world who don't love God, they still know how to love the people around them, the people who they are friends with. You scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. You know, as long as we're on good terms, we're all going to get along fine. But if you don't do what I'm asking, then 3 strikes, you're out. Whereas loving like God is a totally different thing. And that's what Jesus has explained in a lot of the book of Matthew, is Jesus saying, look, it's not about just loving those people. It's about loving your enemies. And it's about praying for the people who persecute you, and turn the other cheek. And if they force you to do this, do this. And if they ask you to borrow something, go ahead and give it to them. And Jesus' way of loving was much, much different than the world's way of loving. You can't love your neighbor well in the way that Jesus was saying, unless you know and love God and experience the love that God has done for all of us, because God's love is so much deeper, so much richer than anything that we could ever fathom and anything that we could ever do. We don't even come close to loving like God. We, in our sinful state, can just do a pale comparison to the way that God loves all of us. Okay, what does it mean when it says love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind? Break those down. What are those? Well, the heart is the thought and the will. So when you tell someone, come on, put your heart into it, it's like they're going through the motions, but their will isn't there. You can see it all over their face. Like, I really don't want to be doing this, but here I am. I'm supposed to do this. And so grumpy me, I'm going through the motions, but your heart's not in it. And then the soul is the feeling center, the emotional center, the passion that's inside you. And the mind is your reason or your intellect. So you can know that the Bible is true with your reason and your intellect. You can say, yep, I'm a Christian. I believe in God. I believe that God sent his son Jesus, and he died for my sins. I believe that. You can believe that in your heart, in your mind, rather, and yet not have your heart into it and not have your soul into it. In terms of, you just think of church as something that's rather dry and pretty unsubstantial. I don't have to go to church. I mean, the pastor isn't even all that good between you and me. I mean, it's pretty dull. He just reads a passage and he explains it, and we're supposed to take something away from it. Or he could be the other way, where you could be super emotional. Like, yoo-hoo, God is great, God is great. Oh, look, I got a new car. God is great, God is great. Until something bad happens. And then you're like, whoa. I don't know what to say about this because God is not that great because your emotions were there. As long as it felt good, you followed God. But then you didn't have your mind there and you didn't have your heart there. And so God's saying, look, I don't want just a part of you. I want it all. I want your total self. I want you to love me with your will, with your heart. I want you to love me with your passion and your feelings. And I want you to love me with your reason and your intellect. I want you to put it all in. Give me 100%, all the way, your whole being. And then, like Ilvisaker said, then you're going to naturally, as you grow in your love towards God, you're going to naturally grow in your love towards your neighbor. It can't not happen because it's like James said, faith without deeds is dead. When you're all in, heart, soul, mind, and then like Luke and Mark add strength, heart, soul, mind, and strength. When you're all in, you're going to be serving God's people. And you're going to be serving people who aren't even in the kingdom just because every soul matters. And you may have an opportunity somewhere down the line to serve them and teach them about God. And so that's what Jesus said. That sums up all the law, all there, all in one. Now, I just want to put a little exclamation point on this with the idea that when we talked about the passage, come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, we talked about the oxen and being yoked together and they're on the same team and they're going on the same path. And I just want to mention that when it comes to horses, the Clydesdales, those big draft horses, it is said that they can pull approximately 8,000 pounds by themselves. So if you just take a big draft horse, want it to do some work, it'll pull 8,000 pounds. And so when you get another draft horse to pair with it, you'd think that it could, possibly pull, 16,000 pounds. That should about do it. You double it, right? But no, the truth is that it is very normal for a team of two horses to not pull 16,000 pounds, but actually 24,000. And then if you get two horses that have trained together and worked together, they actually can pull about 32,000 pounds. And I'm only telling you this because of this. If our heart, our soul, our mind, and our strength are all geared towards loving God and serving Him, just imagine what we could get done in God's kingdom when they're all going in the same direction. You're not sometimes, all in emotionally, but your mind's drifting over here and your reason is saying, well, I don't know. What's the point of following God? And it's not that your will is in, but your emotions passion just isn't in it. If you're all in, just like one person, imagine what you can do in God's kingdom. And then when you meet other people who are all in and you're both working towards the same goal, oh man, can you even imagine? That's one of the things I love about meeting strong, mature Christian people. You can come in as total strangers and you can have such different life experiences. One person could have been as straight and narrow as an arrow. Their path was just Christian all the day from day one, but they're on fire for God. And then you meet this person who's, been in jail or made all the wrong turns, but here they are and they're on fire for God. And you can have gone through such drastically different experiences. And yet when you're both all in for God, you meet each other and it's like game on. Like you've just met your soulmate, not in terms of a marriage, but like it's just such a close friendship right from day one because you get it. And then when you start working together and you're on the same team and it's like, man, let's do the most we can. Let's go even further. And you're pushing me and I'm pushing you. It is so incredibly amazing to be on those teams with those people who are just all in for Jesus. It's just one of life's absolutely brilliant experiences. So Jesus, no problem for him. The devil came against him in the form of continually posing these questions that were meant to trap him. Not a problem. Jesus handled it just perfectly. And that's just such a reminder for us that whatever comes against us too, we don't have to worry. We don't have to fear. God has given us everything we need to get through whatever it is we face today. And tomorrow he'll give us whatever we need to get through tomorrow. And sometimes that includes those friends who are our kingdom workers with us. We just yesterday were at a funeral, a dear, dear friend of ours. His dad was buried yesterday, and we got a text from them today saying, man, it is so good to have Christians to walk alongside us during these times in life. And isn't that the truth? God has given us such amazing gifts. So don't miss the gifts that God has given you today to get through what you need to get through. And be all in for God. Heart, soul, mind, spirit, strength. This has been Little Things, because in God's kingdom, the little things are the big things.